So I just finished the new Zenless Zone Zero story quest and man, there is a lot to talk about. With season 2 coming up soon, this update feels super important to the whole Zenless Zone Zero universe. Now beyond just how big this update is, there are a few questions I really want to dive into in this video. The biggest one for me is, does this new story actually improve the overall Zenless Zone Zero experience, or is it something else entirely? We're gonna break down what I loved about the quest and what I didn't like, because trust me, there is a good amount of both. And if you enjoy content like this, make sure to like and comment down below. Let me know what you think about the quest. Did you love it, hate it, is it somewhere in between? I'd love to hear your takes in the comments. Also, we're pushing to hit 500 subscribers and more by the end of May. So if you're enjoying the video, please hit the subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Alright, let's get into it. Now, before we jump into the breakdown, let's do a quick recap of the story itself. Now, before we even get to the main plot, it's important to note that this quest actually has a little connection to the Soldier Zero storyline. You know, the one where we dive into Ambi's past and meet Trigger. That said, I'm not going to talk about the Soldier Zero stuff here because the link between that story and this one is honestly pretty thin. I think you only see Trigger and Ambi once in this quest. Still, if you haven't played the Soldier Zero quest yet, I definitely recommend checking it out first. It'll give you a lot more context and make some moments hit harder. Anyway, this new story kicks off with us meeting Hugo. So Hugo is a member of the Ravenlock family, which is actually one of the most powerful families in New Eridu. But when we first meet him, we have no idea about any of that. He just comes off as this super weird, mysterious guy. However, he ends up giving us some really important intel. Turns out there's going to be an auction where something major is up for grabs, the Sacrifice Core. Now, if you don't remember what the Sacrifice Core is, or if you're new to it, here's a quick refresher. Sacrifices in Zenless Zone Zero are basically insanely powerful ethereals. We first ran into one during the Belobog arc in the story. There's a lot of mystery surrounding the sacrifices, and this quest actually dives a little deeper into that, but we'll get into all that part later. For now, just know that the sacrifice core is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's the core that powers the sacrifice. So at the auction, we get introduced to two major players who are super important to the story moving forward. First up is Vivian. Now, Vivian has ties to the Exaltists. If you don't know who the Exaltists are, think of them as the Fatui from Genshin, but for Zenless Zone Zero. They're basically the secret evil organization pulling shady moves behind the scene. Now, this story gives us a little knowledge on what the Exorcists are doing, but we'll also get into that later. But just for now, know that Vivian isn't exactly a member of the Exaltists, but she definitely has a connection to them. Then we meet Hartman. Hartman is the current head of the Ravenlock family, and obviously that ties back to Hugo. Now back to the auction. After a bunch of bidding wars at the auction between us, Hartman, and some other folks, we find out that the sacrifice core has been stolen. And guess who pulled that off? It was Hugo. So aside from being part of the Ravenlock family, Hugo has another big secret. He's a member of Mockingbirds. Originally, Mockingbird was a group made up of Hugo and Lycon from Victoria Housekeeping. And yeah, Lycon plays a huge role in this quest too, but for reasons we'll also get into later, and trust me, we'll get into all these things later. Hugo and Lycon had a major falling out. So now the current Mockingbird team is made up of Hugo and Vivian. So moving forward, this is where the story kind of splits into two big parts. On one side, you have the whole conflict between Hugo and Lycon, you know, as former members of Mockingbird. And on the other side, you have all the craziness involving Vivian, the Exalted, the Sacrifice Core, Hartman, and even more Hugo drama. So starting with the Hugo and Lycon side, when they first started Mockingbird, they made a promise to never harm human lives. But because of Hugo's hatred for the Ravenlock family, and especially his father, he ended up kind of breaking that promise. He tried to go after his father, but things got messy. A lot of people ended up getting killed, and it's partially Hugo's fault that Lycon has robot legs and has also lost an eye. Because of all that, their partnership completely fell apart. And throughout the whole quest, you can feel the tension between them with all the arguing, the snide comments, and they even end up fighting at some points. However, the bigger focus of this entire story is the second part. So after the auction, we find out that there are more sacrifices hidden in the Twin Towers. And when we head over to try and recover them, we run into two members of the Exaltists. Or well, kind of members. They're still part of the Exaltists, but their situation is a little complicated. And also, we will get into that soon. Alright, so now we're diving into the real heavy stuff with the sacrifices, the Exaltist, and Vivian. One of the key figures in the Exaltist was a guy named Langdon, who interestingly enough was Dina's father. Now, Vivian's power is pretty unique. She can see people's face, but here's the twist. The face she sees is always a bad omen. So imagine being able to see only disaster everywhere you look. Not exactly a fun gift. Because of this, people started viewing her as a bringer of bad luck. But in classic villainous organization style, Langdon saw the potential in her power. He started using Vivian's ability to identify people with bad fates, and from there, he would turn them into sacrifices. That was basically Langdon's whole research, finding people doomed to bad fates and using them for his twisted experiments. The game gives us a hint that sacrifices weren't always the big scary creatures we see. They were often regular people who had been transformed by some means. Now, there was also a point where Vivian saw a terrible fate for Dina, and Langdon wanted to turn her into a sacrifice, but Vivian, along with others, intervened to stop that from happening. In the end, Langdon got killed in the process, but that moment caused a deep rift. Dina, seeing the death of her father as a betrayal, became one of the key antagonists in this story. Now, Dina is on a mission to complete her father's research, trying to turn other people into sacrifices and create an army of them. So, we're seeing how everything ties together with the core, Vivian, and the dark legacy of the Exaltist. So like any good story quest, we eventually get to the big showdown. We have our main antagonist, Dina, and of course the reason we need to stop her. And in the end, that's exactly what happens. Vivian faces off with Dina and we finally bring the whole thing to a close. But along the way, we discover something huge. The Proxies have a way to control etheric matter inside people's body, and this is massive. Now, I'm sure this is something that will be explored more as we move forward in the game, but for now, it's left hanging, adding a lot of intrigue for future updates, and that's pretty much how the quest wraps up. We stop Dina, but we're left with more questions and answers. Alright, so firstly, let's talk about the things that I liked. Now, if you watched my last video where I broke down Zenless Zone Zero, I mentioned a big issue I had with the story. It felt like the main plot wasn't being talked about enough. There is so much going on, like the Exaltist and the different AIs like Fairy, but it just wasn't being explored in depth. Well, I think 1.7 actually delivers on that. This update gives us so much more to chew on. We get introduced to so many factions and it all ties into the bigger picture, which really builds up nicely for the future. Like now, when we head into Wi-Fi Peninsula, we know that these huge complex elements are all waiting for us, and it's a great way to build hype for what's coming next in the game. But as much as I love this, it's also a bit of a flaw, and here's why. Like I mentioned in my previous video, Zenless Zone Zero has this problem where it throws too much at us all at once. And yeah, that issue carries over to this version too. There is just way too much happening, too many stories being crammed into one. We have the whole Soldier 11 reference, the drama between Hugo and Lycon, the sacrifice score, Dina's backstory, Vivian's backstory is just too much. And because of that, nothing really lands the way it should. Forget the fact that it's a little confusing to follow, even if you can keep track of all of it. The fact is, none of it really hits hard. Take Lycon for example. We finally learned how he lost his legs and eye, which I know a lot of fans have been wondering about. But instead of giving us a chance to sit with that and feel the weight of it, it's like, okay, that happened, now moving on. Nothing gets the emotional space it needs, and because of that, it just doesn't resonate. And there are so many moments like this in the story that should have been impactful, but really are not. Like Hugo's deep hatred for the Ravenlock family. He blames his father for all the deaths and chaos, but because there is so much going on, we never really get to sit with that emotion. It's just rushed through and we miss the emotional depths. Also, by the end of the story, we find out that there is really no real villain. Everybody is either being manipulated or looking out for somebody else. Camille dies to give Dina a better life. Dina in turn gets angry and confused, becoming ethereal, and has to fight Vivian. Then Dina dies, Vivian almost dies. It's a mess of tragic moments. The ending should have been deeply emotional, but because there were too many storylines happening all at once, I was already burnt out by the time I reached the end, and because of that, none of these moments actually got the emotion that they deserve. We never really get to dive deep and feel the weight of what's going on with each character. So, I can already imagine that, just like my last video, a lot of people are going to complain about this point. But here's what I want to say to those people. For all of you who enjoyed the Wuthering Waves 2.3 story, ask yourself, why did you enjoy it? What made it so enjoyable? Because honestly, that story was a really great experience, but what made it work? The big reason, I think, is that we were focused on just one thing. One main quest, one storyline, that was it. And it kept all our attention. I mean, think about it. Imagine if, while we were dealing with the whole Cardathia issue, we got bombarded with side stories. Maybe we get backstory into the Montelli family, then we'd have to go to Brand's location for some unrelated side quest, and then suddenly we're deep into the Phasalia family history, all while doing the Cardathia story quest. Sure, we might have still enjoyed, but the reason that story hit so hard emotionally was because we were locked into one main focus. Yes, we saw Cantarella at the beginning, but the main point of the story stayed clear and strong, solely about Cardathia. In the Zenless Zone Zero story, there is one main objective, getting the sacrifice core, but then there are so many other things going on at the same time. We're trying to understand Hugo and Lycon's conflict, diving deep into the Ravenlock family drama, figuring out the whole Langdon and Dina mess. It's just a whole lot happening all at once, and that's a huge limiter when it comes to telling a story. Emotional moments need space to breathe, so really land and make an impact. If you try to fit too many things like they did in here, it just doesn't work. The emotional moments get lost in the noise. Alright, so the next thing that didn't really sit well with me in this story is the way everyone just overly respects the proxies. I think if you didn't like the Gathering Wives narrative in Wuthering Waves, you might feel the same way I do about Zenless Zone Zero. So far, I think Zenless has done a decent job of building trust with the factions. For example, when we met the Victoria Housekeeping faction, they were defensive, even somewhat antagonistic towards us. But over time, that trust was built. Same thing with Section 6 and Miyabi. She was wary of us at first, but slowly we gained her trust. But here's where it gets weird for me in this quest. Suddenly, everyone has respect for us right off the bat. Hugo, who's never known us before, just respects us. Vivian, who was initially kind of antagonistic, has this instant respect. And to be honest, once Vivian knew we were faithing, I just couldn't stand her. I get the trope they were trying to go for, but this whole worship vibe, the constant compliments, the instant admiration, it just didn't feel right to me. We do the barest minimum in terms of action, and everyone showers us with compliments about how kind and understandable we are. For instance, when we met Yishuan, she said our energy feels nice. Like, hold up, you do not know who we are. How are we already getting all these compliments on our first meeting? And more so, it feels awkward. It almost feels like they go out of their way to compliment us, and it just doesn't feel earned. And this is a huge problem I have with Wuthering Waves too. When you meet someone new, the idea should be starting off neutral and then working towards liking them, not immediately having this over-the-top respect and admiration. But in Zenless Zone Zero, especially in this new quest, that's exactly what happens, and it's just a bit too much for me. But of everything, the one thing I disliked about this story was how anticlimactic it felt. Throughout the entire quest, we're constantly hearing about Sacrifice Core, and I think the word sacrifice comes up more than any other name in the whole quest. I mean, they kept mentioning it over and over again, so naturally, you think this game is building up to something big. You'd expect something huge, but then, when we get to the end, we just fought this slightly big ethereal, and that was it. It felt like the payoff just wasn't worth everything we went through. All the efforts, all the build up around the Sacrifice Core, all the tension they tried to create, it just didn't match what we actually got. I understand they were clearly aiming for a more emotional ending rather than a flashy one, but honestly, it ended up feeling super anticlimactic. I was 100% expecting to fight a sacrifice or something of that magnitude, but that was just not what we got. And if you throw in the fact that even though the ending was supposed to be emotional, the story was so badly paced that it was hard to even feel the emotion properly. It just makes it worse. So, as for my thoughts on whether this story is an improvement on what we got before, I would say it's kind of mixed. On one hand, I do like the direction they're taking. They're giving us some of the really important bits, the ones we've been waiting for. We're learning more about the Exalted, we're getting more insights into the sacrifices, the bigger factions, the top organizations, the Mayflower family, and all these other pieces of the puzzle. And I'm actually excited about that. It feels like they're setting up something big, and I can see them giving us more to chew on as we move into Season 2. But what I don't like, as I mentioned earlier, is the way the story is being told. I really want to thoroughly enjoy Zenless Zone Zero, I desperately do, but right now it's just not delivering the story in a way that allows me to fully enjoy it. The way it's being told isn't doing justice to the potential that it has. Now I get that in the Zenless story there is a lot to unpack, and I wouldn't blame anyone for thinking let's just talk about everything all at once, but honestly that's part of the problem. It ruins the emotional tension that builds up, and I really hope the writers understand that no matter how good a story is, if you don't let moments breathe, it's hard for anything to hit as hard as it should. Just imagine if this entire mission was mostly about the relationship between Dina, Camille, Vivian, and Langdon. We got a bit of info, but not enough. Imagine if we spent more time diving into their backstory, exploring their friendship. That would have made the ending feel so much more impactful. Instead, we're just told about their friendship, and honestly, telling doesn't do much in a story. We need to see things for them to really land. I mean, think about it. If the entire backstory with the Mockingbirds, Hugo and Lycon had been saved for another mission, that would have had way more emotional depth. Lycon losing his legs and his eye would have hit a lot harder if we had time to really feel the weight of that moment throughout its own story. But because everything was crammed together, it just doesn't have the same emotional punch. So I hope that going forward, the writers really understand that stories work best when they focus on one thing at a time. But that's just my take. What about you guys? What do you think about the story? Do you agree with my analysis? Did you like it, or maybe you didn't? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one.